Someone I want to see.
My friend Sherlock Holmes.
221B Baker Street.
Hello there. Welcome to my review of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, Episode 4, The Solitary Cyclist. This episode opens in very creepy fashion with a young lady cycling alone on a woodland track, only to be pursued by a man with a gun. He follows her at a distance, and then we fade to black. The combination of the way it's shot, at a distance, as if we too were peeping in on this woman, the same way the unknown man on his bike is, and the musical score make it this the most unsettling episode opening so far, possibly the entire series. The fact that it cuts away before anything happens is actually far more sinister than if anything had happened to the young woman. Thankfully, we see the young woman safe and well outside 221B. Inside, Holmes is about to solve the mystery of the persecution of Mr. John Vincent Harden, only to be interrupted by the arrival of the young lady. This is a little joke the writer is playing on the viewer, creating suspense only to rip the rug from under us by never giving us the solution. It's from the original story, however it is only a passing reference there, whereas here it's much more of a tease. Thankfully, the story we are about to get is far more intriguing, so I think it works. Had this led to a story that wasn't very good, it would have been deeply unsatisfying. The young lady is Miss Violet Smith, played by a perfectly cast Barbara Wilshire in her first role as the innocent and somewhat naive young woman. Holmes points out she is a cyclist, astounding her, but before he can explain why, Watson jumps in with the correct explanation of Holmes' deduction.
So ardent a bicyclist must be full of energy.
Yes, I bicycle a good deal.
Slight roughening on the side of the soles caused by the friction of the pedals.
Excellent, Watson.
It's a lovely bit of character development for Watson that shows he is learning Holmes' method and establishes that as well as a friendship and working relationship, they are also learning from each other. Brett has the perfect look of pride and annoyance towards Watson, so to prove his own worth, he goes further and deduces,
Yes, I nearly fell into the error of supposing you earned a living by typewriting, but of course it is obviously music.
It's another little insight into the character that is usually lost. He often complains that the police fail to use his methods when investigating crimes that only he is able to solve, and yet also revels in his ability to show them up. As much as he likes Watson picking up on how he works, he's also a bit annoyed by it and has to show off further to be satisfied. Violet explains her situation. Her father is dead, and she and her mother have no other relations apart from an uncle in Africa that they haven't seen in years. They were poor, but recently saw a notice in the paper inquiring about her. On investigation, with the lawyer she was told to contact, she was introduced to Mr. Carruthers and Mr. Woodley. They explained that her uncle had died penniless, but Carruthers, being an old friend of his, wants to employ her as a music teacher for his daughter and is willing to pay her twice as much as normal. Carruthers is played by John Castle, who must have cropped up in every British murder mystery show made over the course of his career, and who has the ability to come across as earnest, yet with a touch of menace, as he does perfectly here. Woodley is played by Michael Siberry, and there is no such ambiguity to his character, who immediately appears slimy and dangerous. Considering we don't yet know what is going to happen, it is pretty clear that he will be involved in some villainous capacity. She continues to explain Carruthers lives in a beautiful house in the country. She took the live-in job and went home every weekend to be with her mother. I really have to praise the location work in this series. They managed to find some truly beautiful period properties that fit the characters perfectly, inside and out. Another wonderful element of this series is how nice it all looks, even when it's hiding something sinister, and you can't help but be jealous of the rogues who usually own these beautiful properties. Violet explains that all was perfectly normal during the week. She taught the child piano with no problems, although it's clear from the flashback that Carruthers fancies her like mad. Then the problems occurred when they received a visitor. Sherlock surmises it was Woodley, and Violet makes the mistake of accusing him of guessing.
I never guess.
One night, she happens to be left alone with Woodley, and he crassly puts the moves on her and proposes marriage. She rejects him completely, but he doesn't back down. Carruthers returns, and they scuffle, with Carruthers getting the worst of it. He throws Woodley out and apologises, begging Violet to stay. She tells Holmes she knows Carruthers likes her, but she's already engaged and he knows it. This is not the end of her story, though. She nearly breaks down as she explains that she is being followed from the house to the train station every Saturday when she visits her mother by a solitary cyclist. A man with a beard and moustache in dark glasses follows her just for a small stretch of her journey. This is where the story falls down a little for me when it's presented in a visual medium, as I'm quite good with faces and this is clearly Carruthers in disguise, so that part of the mystery is very much solved as soon as we see the cyclist. I generally dislike stories that hinge on a character in disguise, as I can usually spot it a mile off, and it removes any suggestion of suspense or intrigue. In this case, though, it doesn't spoil the story, as this is just a small part of the mystery. It doesn't explain why he's following her, and why for just a short section of her journey. Holmes dispatches Watson to the countryside to witness this strange event, as we will discover he often does in these cases, and upon his return, Sherlock chastises him for picking a poor hiding spot and finding out no more than to confirm what Violet told them.
Oh, no, you really have done remarkably badly.
The way David Burke plays this scene means you really feel quite sorry for Watson, who is devastated he's done so badly.
What have we gained by your expedition? The fact that the girl's story is true. I never doubted that. That there is a connection between the cyclist and the hall. I never doubted that either. That the hall is tenanted by a man called Williamson.
There's a little bit of tension between them during this exchange, and the following scene where they find out Carruthers has now proposed to Violet. Holmes takes it upon himself to make his own way to the country and investigate, and makes his way to the place he suggested Watson should have tried, the local pub. He discovers that a house near where Carruthers is staying is being rented by a defrocked vicar, and the place has rowdy parties at weekends, the rowdiest guest being none other than Woodley, who is also in the pub and starts a fight with Holmes, hitting him with a backhander. This leads to a superb fight scene with Brett's Holmes, who any fan of the stories will know is an expert boxer. Certain shots look a little staged, but the majority of it looks very realistic, and Holmes gives Woodley a damn good thrashing. Despite not appearing to be particularly threatening, Brett really looks like he's a capable fighter. Upon his return to Baker Street, he receives another letter from Violet saying that she's quitting after the situation has become too difficult, especially with the reappearance of Woodley. Holmes and Watson return to the country immediately, as Sherlock realises this will be the last chance someone has to make their move on her. They arrive too late, as Violet has already been abducted.
It's abduction. What's it? It's abduction. Murder. Heaven knows what.
soon after, Carruthers arrives in his disguise. Holmes explains what's happened, and they pursue her captors, discovering an impromptu forced marriage taking place between Woodley and Violet, conducted by the defrocked vicar Williamson. Enraged, Carruthers reveals who he is to a surprised Watson,
Carruthers?
who obviously hasn't entirely learned Holmes's methods. Carruthers shoots Woodley, but Holmes intervenes before he can finish him off. While waiting for the police at Williamson's estate, Watson tends to Violet, while Holmes explains to Carruthers that the wedding is invalid, and a forced marriage is a crime for which Williamson will pay. Carruthers finally confesses the whole scheme. Violet's uncle was far from penniless, or far from dead, when they came to England. He was rich and dying. To secure the inheritance, they agreed that Woodley would marry her and they would split the profits. I think it was still the case that a husband would inherit any money that came to his wife, so Woodley would have got it all. Carruthers shamefully admits that they decided who would get to marry her over a game of cards.
I'm ashamed to say it. We played cards for her.
The plan had to be accelerated as the uncle had since died, which resulted in Woodley making his move, while Carruthers was trying to protect her, having genuinely fallen in love with her. Despite the fact that this scene is just people talking with no flashbacks or anything like that, thanks to the way the mystery has been shaped, it still really works well, as by this point you are desperate to know the details of this strange affair. It helps that the actors are all excellent at holding your attention, and it's written so well it's very easy to visualise. Also, the contrast between Carruthers' beautifully kept house and this run-down manor is visually interesting without being distracting. The epilogue, back at Baker Street, explains that Woodley and Williamson had been given heavy sentences, while Carruthers was given a much lighter sentence for his involvement due to how he attempted to save Violet. We then have the resolution to the opening teaser, as Holmes completes his experiment, which causes a chemical reaction that releases a pungent gas into the room.
Is that the answer, Holmes?
Yes, that is the answer, boss.
It's a very funny ending to a really strong adventure that, even though Holmes is too late to prevent the phony wedding, he is able to prevent any further tragedy, as there is an implication that Woodley was liable to do anything to Violet to get what he wanted. The balance of this episode between the mystery and Holmes and Watson's relationship is perfect, one informing the other as we get to see Holmes disappointed when Watson fails, and also able to share a joke with him or entertain him with his tale of barroom brawling. All of the character work is either in service of or complementary to the central plot, and is a direct result of the investigation, which is such a hard balancing act to pull off. The pacing of these episodes are also an incredible feat. There's no fat. It's all driving the plot forward, even when it seems not to be. Like when Watson is observing the cyclist badly, and Holmes has to take over. That leads to them being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and ratchets up the tension for the third act. It's a deeply impressive long-form character development that is pitched perfectly, as you don't need to have seen the previous episodes to understand it, and yet if you do watch them, you can see each step being made. The cast are all doing very strong work, particularly Michael Siberry, who is deeply unpleasant at Woodley. You really do despise him more and more each time you see him. Another excellent story told well by talented filmmakers. Thank you. Goodbye.